Alright, so in this video, we'll be going over monetary policy. So at any given time, the economy can be at one of three places. It could be at full employment. This is shown on a graph where long-run aggregate supply is where aggregate supply and aggregate demand meet. The second is a recessionary gap. This happens when the long-run aggregate supply is to the right of where aggregate supply and aggregate demand are. The third is an inflationary gap. This occurs when the long-run aggregate supply is to the left of where aggregate supply and aggregate demand meet. Alright, so most simply, monetary policy can be explained as when the central banks increase or decrease the money supply to speed up or slow down the economy. And in the United States, the Federal Reserve System acts as a central bank. It was founded by Congress to provide a safe, flexible, and stable monetary and financial system. The Federal Reserve carries out the nation's monetary policy guided by goals set forth in the Federal Reserve Act to promote effectively the goals of maximum employment, stable prices, and moderate long-term interest rates. So basically, the Federal Reserve System is set in place to make sure the economy is running at its best. And if it's not, use tools, specifically monetary policy, to influence the economy. Right, so now we're going to go over how monetary policy can close a recessionary gap. So there are three different ways that you can do this. The first would be to decrease the reserve requirement. Second would be to decrease the discount rate. And the last would be to buy bonds. All of these, in effect, would increase the money supply, which would decrease investment rates, increase investment, and increase the aggregate demand. So on the graphs in front of you, you can see that the money supply has shifted to the right, as well as the aggregate demand has also shifted to the right. The economy is now operating at full employment because long-run aggregate supply is where aggregate supply and aggregate demand meet. Monetary policy can also be used to close an inflationary gap. As stated before, an inflationary gap is when the long-run aggregate supply is to the left of where aggregate supply and aggregate demand meet. So closing an inflationary gap is the opposite of closing a recessionary gap. To close an inflationary gap, you can either increase reserve requirements, increase discount rates, or sell bonds. And all of these would decrease the money supply, which would also increase the interest rate, decrease investments, and decrease aggregate demand. So if you look at the graphs on the screen, you can see that the money supply has shifted left, which shows an increase in investment rates, and then demand has shifted left and met long-run aggregate supply, where that intersects aggregate supply. So the economy is now operating at full employment. Alright, to kind of sum up everything that's been in this video, there are three Fed tools that they can use through monetary policy to influence the economy. So to increase the money supply, you could decrease reserve requirements, decrease discount rate, or buy bonds. And then to decrease the money supply, you could increase reserve requirements, increase discount rate, and sell bonds. And a little trick to remember the open market operations from ACDC Econ is buy big, sell small. Because if you buy, you make the money supply bigger, and if you sell, you make the money supply smaller. Alright, thank you for listening. I hope this made it easier for you, and good luck on your next test.